as a sideline to that, Bill, there's on most of those Christmas Hallmark movies, they never kiss until the very, 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 very last scene.
Yeah, it's got to build up the anticipation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Super. Well, it must be mail call already. So, well, again, thanks for joining. I wanted to talk about good old Ma Bell. One of the things that was really a favorite pavilion for me, particularly at the '64 World's Fair. Mentioned in the past how a friend of mine's sister worked at the Bell system, so she could get us into the fair, but most importantly, she could take us for VIP tours of the fair. Excuse me, let me just close the door here. Something being delivered. So the Bell System Pavilion had a big impact on me. I later in 1970 ended up doing a summer job with the AT&T Long Lines division, and I credit the Bell System Pavilion with spurring my interest in electrical and computer engineering. So I'd like to take us back to the days of Ma Bell, back before Judge Green and his dissent decree took Ma Bell and split it apart. For folks that may not be familiar with the term Ma Bell, it's because AT&T is back then a group of associated companies basically formed for different legal and financial purposes. So you had New York Telephone, you'd have New Jersey Telephone. They were supposedly separate companies, but they all operated under the umbrella of the AT&T, which got to be known as Ma Bell because of all her little siblings and children out there. And Ma Bell was an amazing company. You know, you start thinking about if you look around your house, how many people, just by a show of hands, still have you know, landline telephones? I mean, I keep one, you know, out here in earthquake area because in the cell zones they're going to go out. I also keep it for my alarm system so it can't be jammed and stuff. But you start thinking about how many things you could have bought in 1964 that would still be working in your house today. Maybe an old refrigerator. I think there's still one that my grandparents got, you know, that was running when we sold the house. But for the most part, you don't have, you know, TV isn't working back then. You know, almost anything you can think of, you know, even probably Doris Roberts' toilet had to be replaced. But your telephone from the 1960s, if you picked it up today, you'd still get a dial tone. It would work perfectly. The level of manufacturing the degree of quality control in AT&T was absolutely astonishing. Today, everything's disposable. You buy a phone, it doesn't work, you throw it out. But back then, the Model 500 Bell handset, the traditional one we had all through the 60s and 70s, those things are built like tanks. They just don't wear out. And working for Ma Bell for the several months I did, I had a real close hand indoctrination for, you know, there was what was called a Bell System practice. Every single possible thing you could think about doing, there was a BSP telling you how to do it, and just a phenomenal company. So let me go back and get the first pictures here from 1939. We're going to go back and start at the 39 World's Fair and take a look at some of the exhibits going forward. So, okay, got that up and share screen. Okay, so today it's really it's hard to believe that in 1939 a lot of people did not have their own telephone. People would go to the corner phone. If they were in an apartment house, it might be one in the lobby. You'd go to a neighbor to use the phone, but a telephone in 1939 was still considered a luxury for a lot of people. It was also back in 1939, party lines all over the place, particularly in rural areas. And for people that never had a party line, the way it would work was that your phone would give 2 rings. The guys who were connected on your exact same circuit might get 3 rings. And somebody else may get 1 ring, 1 short and 1 long ring, and you pick up the phone to you know, answer your special ring. The trouble is, if you want to make a call and somebody's on the party line, you'd pick it up and you'd you know, hear the other people talking. And there's always jokes and movies and stuff about the nosy neighbor that would, you know, sneak on the phone on the party line and listen to how, you know, what the neighbors are saying without being caught. Another thing back in 1939 was long distance. Most people simply had not ever made a long distance phone call because they were incredibly expensive compared to people's salaries and everything. So we're going to take a look at the AT&T Pavilion, one of the larger ones at the 1939 World's Fair. And AT&T was truly a corporate giant. So this entire building we're looking at here, the statue up in the sort of just off to the left of center, was a copy of one that was on top of the AT&T headquarters. You can see a statue of the Pony Express rider over to the right. We'll take a closer look at some of these elements. But here again is the American Telephone and Telegraph Company and associated companies. And that's again what makes up Ma Bell back in these days. So down below you had some icons. You had a lineman going up on the pole, a switchboard operator over on the right. And back at this point in time, there were still switchboards all over the place. You did have direct dialing for local numbers, but if you wanted to make a long distance call, you dialed the operator and ask long distance, please. She would then connect you to a switchboard, who then would go through all the routing and getting the call put into place. There was no such thing as dial one, the area code. Matter of fact, there were no area codes back then. If you wanted to, make a call to New York, you'd ask long distance to New York, and that they would connect you. So going into the pavilion here, another quick look outside of it. And the statue done outside. The Indians here are attacking the Pony Express rider, so they're lying in wait. And the whole motif rather, of it is about how communications have changed. That it used to be hard and dangerous to get a message across the country. Back then the Pony Express rider would race the mail going along. Later on, we came up with the singing wires of the telegraph system. And today, of course, we have these wires of AT&T and the other subsidiaries that you can make a call all the way across the country that these riders could never have dreamed of. Again, mentioned it was a giant communications pavilion. On the left, by the way, is the communications pavilion, and these two towers, the communication pylons. So all the other communication industries, the burgeoning things that are coming up at the time, basically over here, RCA had its own exhibit, but AT&T was the big predominant player in communications for voice communication. You had radio, television was just starting, but this was a big pavilion. You can see here in the center a art display. We'll be looking at that a little bit closer. They had some globes out here, not quite the Unisphere, but just as a little plant area, and you could pose and get your picture taken. And again, more scenes outside of things that were very popular and common to people. The linemen going up, putting up the wires and stretching them across the country. One more shot of our Pony Express rider going outside the pavilion. We're going to be going inside in just a moment. Here is the little relief statue that they have outside, the 7 Ages of Man and the Bell system. And as you go through it, you can see all sorts of people sharing things in their life. The policeman in the top left is calling to say, we found your little boy. The mom's, of course, happy to hear it. You have down below them a couple chatting away, telephone dating. You had the businessmen down at the bottom center, all sorts of things going on. We got a closer look at some of them here. But this was, again, how you went through life. That as a kid, you relied on the phone company. As a dating, you relied on the phone company. For education, you relied on the phone company. And over at the top right here, when you catch your biggest fish, you brag and you tell all your friends. So the phone company was with you from infancy to the end of time. When you went inside, they had lots of displays on how the whole phone system worked. So here in this particular one, the woman is in a booth and she's orchestrating the connection of the call. The dots going up across the map are all telephone circuits. This was all basically done for show. It wasn't actually things coming to life as the call was made. But when you went into the pavilion, you would get a coupon to win a free long distance call. And now, keeping in mind, in 1939, most people's friends and families were all relatively close to them. So if you were in New York and you want a long distance call, who did you call? Well, you probably didn't know too many people in California. So they started saying, oh, I'd like to speak to Jimmy Cagney, or I'd like to speak to Betty Davis. And it became a big thing for people to call celebrities. And the phone companies, not any dummies, they would know which celebrities would take the call, because it didn't do any good if you called and said, I want to speak to Betty Davis, and she says, I'm not taking your call. Some of these celebrities were very happy for the publicity, and they were glad to take your call, because the call was not just between you and whoever you called. Everybody in the room, in the giant auditorium, would hear the call broadcast over speakers. So they were pretty careful of who they screened and how they wanted to get the call. Today, you know, we have to worry about Zoom bombing. Back in '39, you know, they'd have to worry about, you know, long distance call bombing. So they were pretty careful on who they connected. And it was, like I said, a lot of show on, you know, Joe Blow, we've picked you at random. Although we've carefully screened your call, we made sure that if you're calling Shirley Temple, she's actually at home and going to take it, and that we actually have her number. Over on the left, you can see they have thing here on the time for this call, 4 different columns of how long it takes to place the call, how long it takes to get the route connected across the country. And back again, and remember in this time, this was not automatic. It would be, you'd call the long distance operator, she'd call the long distance operator out in Los Angeles. They would then connect to the number in Beverly Hills. And then all these things would show you just how fast and near instantaneous the Bell system connections were. So they also did something that was kind of interesting. They did hearing tests. They would put people in a booth and they would play different musical tones and you would raise your hand, sort of what we're all familiar with today if you've done hearing tests. But this was the largest number of hearing tests that were being done up to this point ever. And the phone company was doing it for several reasons. One was to show you how clear your voice came across the line, but it also gave them a tremendous amount of research into what frequencies does the phone system have to transmit and transmit accurately. Obviously, there's all sorts of noises. You know, dogs can hear whistles that we can't hear, things like that. Well, there's generally no need to transmit a dog whistle across the telephone network. So knowing what range of people could hear became very important to the telephone company as far as how do you engineer the system. When they finished the set of tests that they gave out at the World's Fair, they donated the results to the US government. That was the first real basis that people knew then of what the average hearing range was. And they started having details in here. How old were the people when they got the test, so they could start tracking how your hearing deteriorated over time as you got older and things started wearing out. So what was the most hearing of a teenager, an 80-year-old, that sort of thing. They also had other things they were doing. They had an artificial larynx that they displayed. They had something that was pretty neat. They had, it was called the Voder. It was a voice synthesizer they gave the nickname Pedro to. And with a set of keyboards, the operator could sit there and make the voter or Pedro say things. So today, we all know you call and you get some computer generated voice and it's asking you to stay on hold. Your call is very important to us. Well, back then, the idea of a computer being able to talk was really interesting. And they would do things like carry on a conversation with a member of the audience that would talk to Pedro and say, hello, Pedro, how are you? And Pedro would say, I am fine. How are you? Are you enjoying the fair? And it was all done with the operator sitting at the keyboard. They also built and displayed an artificial larynx, which was, again, an important way for people that had throat surgery or loss of their vocal cords to be able to communicate. Amazing new technologies were on display, such as a tape recorder. The thought that you could actually have somebody speak, turn a dial, rewind the tape, and play it back. I mean, audiences were just thrilled by watching this stuff. So it was a really big event, and a lot of people really kept coming in to try to get those long distance calls. Again, if you didn't know anybody in California or anywhere in the world, but hey, I may get a chance to talk to Shirley Temple or Clark Gable, that was a huge draw for people to go in and make the call. So people go back and back and back trying to be the one picked to get it. So 39 Fair was very successful. And then, of course, the war came by, and we didn't have, again, we're talking about mob bells, so there were telephone pavilions and, or discussions of things like in Brussels. We're going to jump up to the next American fair, the 62 fair in Seattle. And this is the bell system here. It was very interesting when you start comparing notes of what they were doing in here. They were still, of all things, in 1962, you could compete to get a free long distance call. They, in 1962, demonstrated the current version of the voter, but there was a lot more emphasis now on data communications. Up above, you see sticking on the pole a copy of the Telstar satellite. We'll see more of those little colored icon panels down below the building, but they started talking about how we're getting into modern communications. At this point in time, you had area codes. You no longer had to call the operator and ask for long distance. But this was the first place they showed a demonstration of Touchstone telephones. They were not available for use at the fair in any sort of widespread fashion, but they had a display inside. And there's a movie you can go on YouTube and see. It's called Century 21 Calling, sponsored by the phone company. And they show how long it took to dial a 10-digit number with a rotary type telephone and how fast you could do it with a touchtone phone. So again, they weren't there for use, they were there for demonstrations. The first widespread use was the 64 fair. So looking down from the Space Needle, they made sure that they took a good advantage of their big roof there and made sure you knew about the bell system. That's over to the right. Cessna had a helicopter display up on the top of the food hall or food circus, trying to convince everybody that you should get your own home helicopter. We see the Century 21 band going by. The theme of the pavilion was the key to universal understanding. And just a nice view, again, to put it in perspective how large this was, one of the larger industrial pavilions at the fair. Ma Bell was truly an industrial giant. I mean, it was the stock for widows and orphans to buy because it always had a very reliable dividend. My aunt, who worked for New York Telephone, was always very happy when her dividend check showed up. And of course, the rest of the family all had to go buy AT&T stock. Here we see the first of a modern telephone, not quite the Serpentine phone booths we'll see at the 64 fair, but you know, up to now, the phone booths are always the Clark Kent changing to Superman style, where you walk in, close the door, and now they've shown up with modern telephones. We'll see more of that coming down the path here in a moment. But take a look here at these colored signs that are outside the pavilion, talking about what the phone system or bell system is getting into besides just you and calling your girlfriend and chatting on the phone. Central exchanges, something called Centrex. That was a major milestone at that point in time, where up to this point in time, if you had a business and you needed to put in telephones, you had to get a separate telephone line into your business for everybody's desk. So if you had 1,000 people sitting at your company, you had to have 1,000 phone lines put in the building. Not cheap, not easy for the phone company to engineer, but with Centrex now, you would go in there and they would give you a prefix, or you could all say, you know, I'm going to be on the Centrex system, but I'm going to run one cable in there and then through various technologies, multiplex the phone calls in there, or let you call from your extension at your desk to somebody else's extension just by calling 4 digits, or in smaller systems, 3 digits. If you want an outside line, you dial 9, and then you know you go off. Or in other companies, you can make sure that you couldn't just dial outside, like back at WED. If you wanted to call outside, you had to call the operator, and she'd look up if you were allowed for long distance calls or not. But Centrex was a real game changer for business telephones. Data phone, we'll see more of that coming up. That was the idea that you could send data over a telephone line. So if you were going to be doing banking, or your company wanted to send my company a proposal or specifications, you could send that over a data line. Telstar, again, the revolutionary satellite for doing both voice and data. Just all sorts of things here. Coaxial cable buried under the sea. A lot more than just picking up the phone and calling Aunt Gertrude. Another view of the communications pavilion. It was right near the Harushi mural, which is still in the park today. The Cessna helicopter coming in. Oh, this was just a quick view. After the fair ended, they were taking all these things back out. So I just, another view of the bell system. I'd like to know where those logos ended up on it. So we see the fair going away. Another view looking down. We'll get inside in a second. Okay, there's the phone booth again. Again, rotary telephones, Touchstone only inside the building for demo. But this was a real eye opener. Again, this was a candid picture taken by a visitor to the fair. Most people would not be taking pictures of standard telephone booths, but wow, this was high tech. This was modern stuff to have a telephone booth outside. And what really made it nice was the weather in Seattle was certainly conducive that you could be outside, didn't get a lot of rain on for, I guess, a good portion of the fair. But you know, the sort of thing that we started seeing technology changing. More of the icons there outside it. Inside, you had the display where you could dial the telephone and you could, again, compare your speed to the touch tone versus the dial, or you could talk to the Disney characters. And this became really, really popular. They had at Disneyland, you could talk to the Disney characters in Tomorrowland. And they had the same sort of thing that we're going to see at a whole bunch of Bell System displays. Disney and the phone company went way back for these displays. So these guys are having fun chatting away. Inside, they had other displays examining how your ear actually works. You know, how does the sound get to your eardrum, translate into nerve endings that go up to your brain, that sort of thing. So they had all sorts of displays where they could put you on the phone, then they could change the quality of the line, showing you how, oh, this was a phone line of the 1930s, but now with the modern 1962 phone line, see how much clearer everybody sounds today. Also on display here is something that was real new at this point in time, the Princess telephone. Again, I mentioned earlier the Model 500, the traditional business test telephone set. But they started coming up with things like Princess phones. I think in '64 they showed the trimline phone. Things that Ma Bell were trying to make phones more appealing and attractive to people other than just businessmen. So you could get a Princess phone like this in your home, and you could also pay the extra amount for the lighting feature, which was a small transformer that would plug in that would light up your phone. And these are all the ways that Ma Bell made lots of money because the only phone you could use on your phone system legally was a Ma Bell phone. The only way you could light up your Princess phone was with a Ma Bell transformer. And that's the sort of stuff that got Ma Bell and Judge Green into head-to-head combat with his dissent decree. We're going to hop over to 64 now. And we're going to take a look at the building of the Bell System Pavilion. The Bell System Pavilion, as we know it, at the end of the fairgrounds, had a incredible location. I mean, just everybody that was looking at the fireworks show, they were staring at the Bell System all throughout it. So we're going to be taking a look. We're in 1963 now. The fair is coming along. This picture was taken standing at the entrance of the Bell System, looking out. In front of us is the Pool of Industry. There's IBM's egg going up, the Unisphere off in the background. The continents have not yet been put on it. But we're going to be watching as the pavilion gets put together. And this particular day, they were delivering and installing these giant metal cylinders, which became the tower, the microwave tower, that all voice and data calls went in and out of the fairground. So I got a real kick out of thinking about, you know, all this stuff is being built. You can see here being built by the Dayton Metal Company, delivered in sight, and the bolts were already placed in the concrete. We'll see more of that, you know, for how the whole thing had to be put together. General Electric was one of the first pavilions done at the fair. You can see how others are not you know, they're very far from being done. Off to the right, tower going up for the New York State Pavilion towers. But GE needed so much to be done for the building of it that to get the Disney show in there, they were the Kodak, I think, was the first one done, and GE was the second. We're over in the admin building. Again, the Touchstone telephones are not yet ready. So they had a whole bank of pay telephones in the admin building. Every phone at this point was going through temporary lines out of the facility. These were all, it's interesting. This picture I showed to some telephone people, and they were just all in awe of it, because white pay telephones were really, really hard to get. Everybody got black pay telephones, or if you're really special, you could get a chrome one. But somebody was saying that they've never seen so many white pay phones in one spot. So here we are in 63. The Bell System Pavilion is going up. Massive steel structure built by American Bridge Company, the same guys that built the HemisFair and the United States Pavilion. If you look on the pavilion, you can see over where the mouse is moving around, one of the legs that will hold up the pavilion during the fair. But if you look off to either side, you can see temporary towers which held up the pavilion as it was all being bolted together. So that's the trick, how they used to put this together. They assembled it, got everything where the building was cantilevered and able to hold its own weight, and then they took these other pavilion towers off the pavilion and then covered them over, and all this was covered in plastic sheathing. So here they're putting the tower in place. Some of these pictures are going to be slightly out of order, but again, you can imagine the sigh of relief that the bolts that you placed in the concrete match the holes that you put in the tower. More of it sections coming in. There's a Travelers Insurance going up behind us. The famous Jane Parker sign. Big cranes needed to put all this stuff in. Call center. Again, I'm sorry, these are kind of out of order. Call center in the admin building. If we zoom in here, and I can zoom in, you can see that this was done by the Dayton Metal Products Incorporated of New York, New York. I've not looked up to see if they're still around. Maybe someday I'll try to track them down. Probably at 405 Barretto Street, we'll find a Starbucks these days. But you can really imagine this is a real one-off piece of engineering to be built for this thing, all welded together. And what if they made a mistake and dropped it? They were on a real tight schedule to get this thing done. Just anything would go wrong, you'd be in a world of hurt. So again, we're flipping through 63 as they're putting it all together. Quick look out to the HemisFair, and again, American Bridge. They were the premier company. They're still in existence today. They were a subsidiary of United States Steel, but the premier company putting together the incredible pavilions at the fair. Have no idea what this guy is pointing at, but there's a hatch on the side of the admin building. Inside, once they get the pavilion together, there's a guy that's putting all the wiring together. And when I worked for the phone company, you had to be real good at soldering. Everything was done with soldering, or some other stuff later got being done with quick connectors. But you learn real fast how to solder. So all these things being put together to bring the phone system in, because all the phones at the fair ran through a brand new central office, which used something revolutionary called electronic switching system, ESS, that was built here before everything was done with rotary selectors and motors driving gears and everything around. The idea of a true centralized electronic system was kind of amazing. If you go back out to the fairgrounds today, these concrete walls here are still there, I believe, and that's blast protectors for the transformers that were being put in place. The power systems for the temporary structures being put in. But this guy from the phone company is out there putting a line in out there to get monitoring of the power system, so that they would be able to detect at a central station how they were doing. And again, pay phones all over the place. They were replaced when the Touchstone version came out. Or these guys putting this stuff together. Over in the center here, this concrete, it's going to be covered in concrete. It's wooden forms here. All we'll see pictures of it, but it's they had the logos of all the Bell operating systems out here. So as you came in, you saw this great display of all the Bell companies to make you realize what a behemoth mom bell was. Wiring rack inside. Again, somebody had to figure all this stuff out and order all that wire. Oh, one thing, by the way, working for the phone company, when I first went to work there, the very first thing you had to do was take a color blindness test. And if you had any sort of hint of color blindness, you didn't get to go to work for Ma Bell, because these wires would have amazing combinations. It would be a wire, but then it might have a lavender, a green, a red, and a blue stripe. The next one might have the same colors, but in a different order. If you couldn't tell your colors and which wire to connect to what, you didn't go to work for Ma Bell. Here's one of the temporary towers holding the building up as it's being put together. Just flip through these. Again, this is going to be the logos. And one thing, since the end of the construction here, one of the things I just wanted to do real quick is, whoever had gone out there, these were all taken April 16th in 1963. Somebody went off and they just shot some of the pictures of the engineers that were responsible for the pavilion. So back then, you know, compared to today, everybody wore ties at work. Man here has his stack of cigarettes, Parliaments, all stacked up in a well-used ashtray in his desk. You know, the sort of thing you would not find in most companies today. If we, come on, mister. Again, you got your pocket protectors, everything being done with paper and pen, no computers. He's working on one of the wiring diagrams here, everything being done by hand. Yeah, it was a whole, and here again, you can see we all talk about pocket protectors, but he's got one here and he's got his ballpoint pens and he's all set to go. So ancient technology, and it's what, you know, built all this stuff and really made it work. So let me come back at it here. Some quick views later in the year. These were all taken just the winter between 63 and 64. The pavilion now has had its plastic sheathing put on it. You still have scaffolding down here. It's no longer holding up the building for structural purposes, but it's being used to put the facade on the building. The walkway down here, by the way, is one we've talked about. It's where the would submerge at high tide, come visible at low tide, and where they would wheel out all the fireworks that would go out into the launchers for the fireworks show. But Bell System, when they were documenting how their pavilion was coming. There was talk, by the way, of saving the Bell System Pavilion after the fair and using the underground basement, because it doesn't really show in these pictures. Up here at the top, where the white part is, was the ride. It was called from Drumbeat to Telstar. The second year, they changed it to TomTom to Telstar. But that was the big ride up above where the show was done. We'll be talking more about that in a minute. Down the basement was where all the displays were of telephone technology. And they had really considered saving the building, but again, that was something that Robert Moses was not too crazy about. So I'm gonna jump here into some of the pictures of the pavilion itself. So very familiar view to people at other fair. The tower has now been finished. We've seen them put together, so that steel structure now has an aluminum cladding on it. Down below the glass enclosed area was a workroom where the people who were monitoring the communication systems worked. So you were working kind of a fishbowl that you were invited, the public was invited to come and take a look inside. But that microwave dish up at the top, the sort of triangular segment up there, beamed all the communications out of the fair to another AT&T facility nearby. That meant they didn't have to run massive cables and you know, bury them in the ground for something that was going to be useless by the time the fair ended. Again, great technology. So that was one of the first things that had to be done because everybody needed their telephone service for their pavilions. And it was one of the last things to be decommissioned as the fair itself was being shut down. Here we get a nice view of the Serpentine phone booths. They came in different sizes. Sometimes you had 3 of them, sometimes you had 4 of them. Sometimes you had emergency phones on the side of it. But again, this is a outgrowth of the version we saw up in Seattle in '62. There's one of these left during the time the fair was being taken apart. The fellow came in and had one blowtorched off, thrown in the back of a truck, and hauled out of there. The phone company took the phones out, but they let them have the booth. And now Mitch Silverstein, very instrumental in getting it saved and donated to the Queens Museum, and is working on trying to get it restored. Be pre-opening, again, view, closer view. There's our walkway that goes out, the glass enclosed area down below. But it was a tremendous building, absolutely huge. Now we're down in the basement, and we're going to see some of the displays. The hostesses, and they tended to have all hostesses working in there, were actual Bell employees that had come from around the country. A good number of them coming from New York Telephone, because housing was obviously not an issue. But they had contests throughout the Bell system to bring people in, because they didn't want to just have models demonstrating the stuff. These people actually knew how the equipment worked and what it did. So in this particular case, she's able to demonstrate, you see all these switches here. We can zoom in a little bit. That if they were to move these switches and change the pattern of your voice, taking out the highs or the lows or whatever, you know, what does the voice hear? What does music hear? All these things were now getting transmitted over the system. Display here showing how the guys back in the Bell Labs were very instrumental in developing new things. There was a big thing here with crystals. We'll see they actually had a machine that would show how they would cut crystals and fabricate them. We're coming up to the days of Bell systems. Bell Labs is an absolutely incredible company that we still today, anybody that uses a Unix system that was developed at Bell Labs, the transistor developed at Bell Labs, all sorts of things developed at Bell Labs. Here are displays showing, again, if you put a telephone up to this model, the ergonomics are all taken into account on how far the ear and the mouth are on the average person. So you can see down below the phones open to display showing all the various parts, but they were demonstrating how you had to build a phone that would work, that a 4-year-old kid could hear it, but it was also the same size, how to work for an adult, and how did you optimally position the mouthpiece and the earpiece. More of the displays in the basement area. Back in the background, you can see Telstar. You can see one of the electronic switching systems, again, absolutely silent. If you ever went into a telephone facility, they were very, very noisy up to this point in time, because when you dialed, say the number 7 on your phone, something would go and make 7 clicks on a rotary dial. When you would dial a 4, it would jump up to the next number and make 4 more clicks, 3 for the next click. So if you were dialing a 10-digit phone number, this thing was making, dozens and dozens of clicks. All of a sudden, ESS came into place, and it was something new and modern. It also allowed all sorts of things that they had talked about at the '62 World's Fair that now people could start seeing, and things that we take for granted today, but things like call waiting. You couldn't do that with the rotary dial system, but with the electronic system, you could put a thing in there to go beep when you get a call. You could also do things like call forwarding, all sorts of things that, again, you take for granted today were unheard of before this point in time. So another host is here demonstrating how communications are going here, that they allow us to operate missiles and other control systems electronically. Satellites bring us closer together. Entertainment, now you can send across the country. And they had been doing entertainment over phone lines for years, but they were special phone lines. If they were doing telephone connections for old radio shows or for TV shows, they were not the same average circuit you used for dialing your mom. Here again, I mentioned a crystal cutting machine, how they would slice these quartz crystals into very, very, very thin slices that would vibrate and be used for making phone system. Something here is kind of interesting. This is called the time alignment speech interpolation system. We put a cable across the ocean. You can see a section of it down below in yellow, and we want to be able to talk to people over in Europe. But if you only had, I don't know how many lines you could put in that yellow cable, but say 100. that would mean only 100 people could talk from the United States to Europe. Well, with this TASI, it's also called time delay multiplexing, a whole bunch of other things. It would give you a nanosecond byte of a circuit, then switch to somebody else for a nanosecond, switch to somebody else, and then put your voices back together at the other side. And the actress Hedy Lamarr had actually come up with some of this technology back in the World War II days, and ended up being very instrumental in how long distance calls worked, and even how your current cell phone works. Because when you're on a cell phone, you can't tie up the one channel for that tower and just have exclusive use to it. Your phone and the phone system are basically time slicing you, how many other people might be nearby, putting all your calls into one circuit, and then taking it all back out again at the other end. So that's how this particular display was showing how you can cram all these calls into one circuit, go out at the other end, and then we can uncram them back. Big thing, of course, the display, and one of the big things the Bell Systems remembered for its 64 fair was the picture phone. We'll see more of the overall picture phone display coming up, but the idea here was you got a number picked out of a hat, and you went into a booth, and you were now able to call from your picture phone to another picture phone. During the time that Disneyland was open, you could actually call from your picture phone here to a similar display out at Tomorrowland and talk to people in California. And this was really kind of neat that you would be able to, see somebody in the other line. People started realizing after a while, though, that, after the novelty wore off, hey, I'm in New York, you're in California, how's the weather? What are you wearing? What you have for lunch today? That you really could say all that over the telephone. You really didn't need to see the other person. These phones were all black and white. You can see up above, they have a copy showing how they're the same display that these people were seeing. So it was extraordinarily expensive. And I've got a flyer that we give you some of the numbers. To make one video phone circuit from one end of the country to the other took the equivalent of 12 voice circuits that had to be wired together in a special configuration. It became very expensive, and I'll go through that more in a minute. This phone is very unique. Telephone collectors would love to get it because it's not a 10-button touchtone telephone or a 12-button touchtone telephone. If you count the buttons, it's an 11-button touchtone phone, and these were developed purely for use for an extra signaling key needed to make the picture phones work. But the idea here was it was a speaker phone. You would dial the person on the other end, they would answer, you'd put the phone back in its cradle, and you would be able to talk to them and see them, and they'd see you. They had a display here of early telephones going from the candlestick all the way over to the right. We work our way around the various 1920s model, 1928 it says. No dial on it because back at that point you picked up the phone and you would say, please get me Wayfair 1234, and they'd connect it. 2 years later, wow, the dial telephone was out. That was a big thing that you could now dial the other number. Then we get further down into the years, another more robust handset. The one next to us, the Model 500. Then we get into speaker phones, Princess phones, and then again, touchtone phones going all the way through. I think I still have one of most of these in my garage. Western Electric, as I mentioned, the manufacturing arm of the Bell system, they made everything. We had our pencils were made by Western Electric. Our pens were made by Western Electric. Everything we used at the phone company was made by Western Electric, and they were built to last. So they had all these manufacturing lines that would come through. When you moved out of your house, you didn't take your phone with you. Your phone went back to Ma Bell. Your phone went back to Western Electric. They would upgrade it. They had special techniques on how they would polish the plastic, repaint it, recolor it, and put it all back out there, put new cords on it. If it needed a network upgrade, they would do all that. So they had tremendous manufacturing and remanufacturing capabilities. Mentioned at the 62 fairs, data speed services, a big thing here to go off and send data over the phone lines. They demonstrated, you can see teletypes down here. Fax machines. There was a neat machine. I actually have the samples of it where you could write something on a piece of paper A mechanical pen on the other side would copy what you were writing and do an exact copy of it out there. If you wanted to go and have the fun of looking up your name in a phone book, the major cities of the United States, they had the phone books out here. You could look those up and find your name and show it to people. Let me hop out of this one here for a second. Let me go over. We're going to talk a little bit about the ride system. So the ride system, we see these guests getting in the chairs. There were 1,000 of these chairs. They alternated between blue and green chairs. There was a speaker on either side that as you got into the ride, the speakers would mechanically move closer to your ears. And you would go off on this to have a movie. Lasted about 15 minutes. It wasn't really a movie. It was a series of movies. It was a moving belt. There were 2 of them that went through the system. And you got the show, as I mentioned, from Drumbeat to Telstar or from TomTom to Telstar. It used 65 different Norelco 16mm projectors. And Hal Holbrook was seen in it at the very beginning saying hello. And he did a whole bunch of vignettes throughout the movie, throughout the ride system, explaining how communications worked from the early days up to today. And some of these little clips that he had only lasted 6 seconds, others were 15 seconds. But again, for an example of the phone company thing about quality, they would replace every one of these film strips every single day. So they had 65 different projectors. They also had slide projectors that were synchronized into this system. And you would ride through there and see it. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that can't be duplicated today because 65 different movie screens, 65 different projectors all put together. You had the Instamatic, the carousel slide projectors in there as well. What's really kind of interesting is the soundtrack to this does exist, and it's on the nywf64.com website. And I went on this ride so many times, I could still sing the song, except my singing is absolutely terrible. It was really a captivating show. But you would think with 65 different projectors, and they were changing this every single day, that some of these film strips would show up. So far, nobody's found any. They don't seem to exist. So there were 500 chairs in each of these 2 continuous loops. They were in 2 different tiers, so you could see over the people around you and then move you all the way through it. Now, not so surprisingly and coincidentally, it wasn't too long after this that Disney ended up with their Omni Mover system for the taking you through the Haunted Mansion and that. I'm going to go through some slides that Bell System itself developed to tell you about their slides. Let me go through this other one first. So this was a concept set of slides that were sending out to phone companies, employees across the country, trying to get you interested in coming and seeing the fair and explaining where all your advertising money was going to go. So early shot, the fair is actually not open. These are Bell employees all posing for it. But the Serpentine phone systems. The Chatterbox, this was their first idea for what became the family phone booth. This was, again, what we had this out at Disneyland. You could go into this at Disneyland and make a speakerphone call, but they decided that this was not high-tech enough for the New York World's Fair, so we'll get into the family phone booths in a moment. Here's an overall display of the picture phone section. The operator we saw before would be sitting in the blue chair. Each of the people would be sitting here and show you how they would make the connection between them. Again, different display. We saw earlier how the patterns of your voice would let you, you make a musical tone, that things would light up and show you if a woman was singing, a man was singing, how different the communication patterns were. How the larynx works, how the ear works, how everything communicates in between. They also had a display here on how bird calls and things are done. So again, how the ears can differentiate all these different tones. This is the section here on animals communicating, the buzzing of bees, and whatever sound little mice make and communicate with themselves. To give you an idea how big Ma Bell was, 22 more telephones are being installed every minute of the working day. This counter here was counting up how many there were out there. And again, this is again explaining to all the employees what the Ma Bell was building back there, putting the facade on it. Concept art for one of the displays down in the basement. This explaining how Telstar is now taking the need for communication cables buried in the ocean and getting rid of those and putting up in the sky. And this gave me an idea for the ride. You'd be in these chairs and they had paintings on the walls that then different scrims that would separate the areas so you didn't see too far down the road, and Hal Holbrook would come up and start explaining how cavemen did drawings on the wall. Then they did drawings on hides, and now today, of course, we're all doing the long distance dialing. Model of the pavilion, and then they would explain to everybody where the fair was. So I had a lot more Bell stuff, but I don't want to get too hung up here. We don't want to get too late. Phone booths. Again, real important to us. So we're going to be taking a look at, again, real modern technology. So we'll combine this for our Disney fans. Somebody was getting a picture of Alice and the White Rabbit, but in the background, the Serpentine phone booths. You can see a door over in this one. That's where the emergency phone was. So the Pinkerton guys could open it up. They could call, and it had a direct circuit that went right back to the fair security office and headquarters. Giant "You Are Here" map and another set of the phone booths. That's the Spain pavilion in the background. And you get the real combination of the modern and the old Thailand and the phone booths. That logo was very prominently displayed, so it was great subliminal advertising all throughout it. And people casually relaxing. There's a whole bunch of pictures I have of these things where people have taken their shoes off and are trying to get their feet some relief from the days of the time at the fair. Here's one, so she's had a tough day, and you can see high heels. The things people did back in '64, you'd wear high heels to the World's Fair. But they really stood out. You can see them all over the place. We've actually got the phone pictures of Mitch's actual phone booth out there. So they also, besides the Serpentine ones, they went with the family phone booth. So they had the Chatterbox at Disneyland. They decided they would go with a more modern looking view for the fair. So this is a model they had built of the family phone booth. One of them being out there, backside of it. But I thought this was a nice way. It sort of looks like, the IBM egg and a smaller egg down below. These were air conditioned. You could see the ventilation ducts down below. You could duck inside. And I think a regular telephone booth at this time was 25 cents. I think the family phone booths were a quarter, but you could put the family in there and you could call your relatives and say, hey, we're at the World's Fair and you're not. And it was really cool to be able to call back and, have your grandparents talk to, like in my case, myself, my four brothers, and my parents, and we could all speak together. So none of the family phone booths have survived. They unfortunately were all torn down or torn apart. But you can see that the center kiosk, everybody's leaning over and having a good chat in there. So let's just see real quick. I think I had some more pictures here. Yeah, okay. If you ever want to know how to make the ride system work, again, this was the very sophisticated controls for the Bell system. If we zoom in on it, we can look down. There were two different rides, two different tracks built for them by Westinghouse. One of the very few things that was not done by the phone company itself. But you could basically get the ride. I'd love to know what all these combinations are. There's numbers 9, 10, 11, 12, then 13 and A, B, C, M. Maybe someplace knows what IPT or what these things mean. But basically, your ride would go off and get you going out there. This was in a booth up over the ride track. You can see it up here. That's where the guy sat. The ride is just getting to be ready to open, but he would go up the stairs. He could sit here and watch the loading, unloading area. Typical Bell system, you had a custom-made cover to go over this thing. But for anybody that's worked in a Disney theme park, you probably had your share of ride control systems. And It was simple, it was mechanical, and it did what it needed to do. So we're going to jump out of 64 and we're going to go up to 67 Montreal. So we're going to hop through some of these. Bell System in Canada, again, different company legally and everything than Bell System in the United States, but the same technology. You had a Western Electric manufacturing, making things up in Canada, same specifications. So at this point in time, we now have their version of a modern phone booth. It wasn't the Serpentine one, but again, it was outdoors. We're still using, at this point in time, 10-button touch-tone telephones with the primary one. They hadn't added the star asterisk yet. Those are being reserved for future banking systems. They also put in more prominent emergency telephones, realizing that it was an emergency and you had to go find a phone and open the door. You might not do it, but if you had a bright red phone that you could go and get back to the command zone, that would work. And we're inside. One of the things that I've always talked about on Expo 67 was the hostess costumes. Were just the styling, and it was just so chic. And we're going to see some views of the Bell hostesses. So the shows up here had to be done in English and in French. So the one hostess would come by and proudly tell you the models of the data telephones and how you could do banking over the phone and check your balance and see whether or not your paycheck had cleared the bank. And then the French hostess would jump into it and give you the same information back. So they've got these neat microphones hanging around their necks, and they're also demonstrating it. This was the main building, the telephone pavilion. It wasn't called the Bell System, it was called the Telephone Pavilion. And in it, with a major thing was the Disney film of Canada. Again, I'll be jumping around a little bit about these. Picture phone was still being displayed. Pavilion of the telephone. Oh, this was a display inside. The hostess are now displaying a card dialer. Today you can put people in your iPhone. You have the little icon there for your favorites. So if you want to make sure you want to call mom, dad, or your brother, you're in favorites. But back then, the way that you did call favorites was a card dialer. You got this particular phone had a reader that you would take these plastic cards that are standing up out of the phone, and you would punch out the numbers in the order to be dialed. So if I wanted to make a call, and I would punch it out the number 1, and then I'd punch out a hole for the 2, 1, 2, 5, 5, 5, 1, 2, 1, 2, and they'd be all holes now on this plastic card. And if I wanted to call information in New York, I would just flip through it, pick it up, stick it in the card reader, and it would go through it mechanically, going pop through it. The little magnetic sensors would find the holes, and dial the phone for you. So again, seems pretty antiquated, but if you were somebody that had maybe 10 numbers you dialed all the time, the thought that you could just pop this in there, hit the button, and then it was a speaker phone, it would answer, you could talk. That was a real time saver for business. Again, the telephone pavilion, we'll take a look inside in an upcoming shot. In the post-Expo 67 days, the pavilion was used for the USA pavilion, and they showed America the Beautiful in here, this Circlevision film. Again, more of the bilingual education going on. They're doing banking here. You can see the French word up there, and they're showing how they could do stuff over there. An overall view of the Bell System Pavilion back with the US in the background. Iran and the telephone company together. Everything was kind of jumbled up for where you could fit things. Here's another display of the telephone booths up there. Turned out that the outdoor phone booths like this had several shortcomings. One was that whatever you were saying here in the red shirt would go up and echo on the dome and come back down and be heard by the people on the other side. So you didn't have much privacy. And matter of fact, if you had anybody loud on the phone, it got to be annoying because your calls, you could, like I said, it literally just bounced it right back over. The other thing was that if it was a hot day, all the heat would focus on this like a lens and people coming down. So you come up with things that look real good for an exhibition, but you never see them again. I don't think any of these phone booths have survived anywhere. So this often had very long lines. The exhibit inside was the Circlevision film, again done by Disney. And here we see, if you look in real close on this picture, the Disney characters. You can see if I want to dial number 2, I'm going to get Snow White. If I dial number 0, I'm going to get Donald Duck. And you had the option of dialing in English or in French. So the first 5 of them were done in English, and the second 5 were done in French. So if you wanted to dial Snow White in English, you would dial a 2. If you wanted to dial in French, you would dial a 7. And this was, again, the first time many people had put their hands on a Touchstone telephone. So being able to dial on the phone, it was the Princess phone was still new, and you could get to talk to the Disney characters. The camera rig used to film it, there were, I think there were 9 different screens, and each of them covered 40 degrees of vision. This was one of the rigs that iWorks built out there. You can see the Disney logo down on it. This is now on display up at the Disney Family Museum in San Francisco. But it was really a spectacular thing that you had to put this together, and they had to time all these cameras synchronized together. So they would all start together, get up to speed together, photograph together. This rig could be put on the bottom of a helicopter and flown around. It could also be put on a B-25 bomber and lowered down to get vistas. It could be mounted on the top of a truck or a station wagon. It got tremendous amount of views and use in different scenes. Here's the B-25. It's got the Expo logo up on the front. Again, they would take this all across Canada, open the bomb bay doors, lower down the 360-degree camera. The wheels, of course, would be up by this point in time, so you got some really great views of it. And this is a shot done in the Epcot. The lean rails are what basically give it away. But this gives you an idea. Most of us have probably seen one of the 360-degree films. They went all across Canada. They were shooting with all sorts of different displays and things that were done, famous things. So you have the Mounties done out here. But I think I have a shot over here. Yeah, these are more shots inside. There's an overhead shot you can see of the Canada Pavilion. Here it is. They didn't have the lean rails in it at this point in time. So this is taken from the roof shot and looking down, and everybody's just there. And you can look around to the left, look around to the right. The show's gone all around you. But when you got into any sort of dizzying motion, the camera banking through the Rockies or things like that, it introduced vertigo for an awful lot of people, and they realized that they need to put lean rails in, which, as we all know, if you worked at the park, the spiel would say the lean rails are not designed for the weighted view or your children. But that was an intervention that they came in. The film was really very popular. You can see the crowd here jammed in, and there were huge lines for this thing. The Canadians took huge pride in being able to see their particular sections of Canada. There were interesting things that they learned in it, that they used xenon bulbs to do it, 9 different projectors. And they had realized from their time doing America the Beautiful, when it was done for Circarama back at the Expo 58, was that the bulbs, no matter how much you try to do it, they throw a different amount of lights and color intensity at different ones. So that they had to take that into account when they actually photographed the film, and some of the scenes that they had done was to try to how do we make sure that we don't have anything where one projector is glaringly different from the other one that is going to make people, you take away from the visual aspect of it. After Expo ended, the film was returned to Disney, but it came back to Canada. They had it in a couple later years. They showed it as a retrospective at some of the Man in His World years. When we were getting ready to build Epcot, we built a temporary Circlevision set up on the stage at the studio in Burbank, screened the existing Circlevision films to see what worked, what didn't work, what could be reused for the Canada films. Do we really need to go back and reshoot some of this, or was it, pretty much the Rockies are still the Rockies? But if we had something that was shot back in '67 and people's clothing had changed so much, that needed to be reshot. The film got re-shown once after that. Well, not just one day, but for a short period of time. They brought it back in January '74 at the Magic Kingdom for a special event, Salute to Canada. And then they've reshot it, different updates. So I think Martin Short might still be seen in it when you're there today. So they also had, let me jump out of here. Again, displays and different things of the different telephone technology. So that was the last of the really big Bell System pavilions and the last of the money being spent, because the handwriting was getting on the wall for the way the phone company was going. But that doesn't mean it's the last of the interesting exhibits. We're going to hop now to San Antonio, Texas. We're coming down a boat at the canal ride at the HemisFair 68. And whoa, what's around the edge there? We see the very familiar Bell System logo. This was the Bell System at the HemisFair 68. It was done by a architect out of San Antonio that built a building, but a company called Bertel was the same one that had done all the exhibits up at Expo 67, was also hired to do the exhibits at HemisFair. So again, very familiar logo. Some nice colors outside, trying to get Ma Bell into the vibrant days of the, you know, the 70s, and things are swinging and going forward. But we had a lot of repeat in here. If we look here, there's the Black Gold Hotel, and down below, we zoom on it. What do we see? We're going to see Disney characters, and then telephones down below. We're going to be calling the Disney characters again. So inside, they had they did have a quick little film in here that focused on high-speed communications and how things got done. But we had the picture phone, pretty much unchanged since 1964. The technology still black and white. I really get a kick out of the outfits that they were wearing for their display, the Western style hat thrown up there. But the same sort of thing that you did back in 64, you can make a call to somebody else, or you can make a call out to you know, to Disneyland. Inside, you could use your skill finding. Could you beat the computer in a game of computerized tic-tac-toe? The computer would also try to guess your age and tell you different things about yourself. Neat show that they had inside was Mark Wilson, the famous magician, did a film here where he would interact with the hostesses up on the screen. So Mark would be discussing certain things about magic, and then they would demonstrate them. And again, his sections were all pre-recorded, but the hostesses would work in conjunction with him. So he's going to show us how we can levitate somebody. And we just don't have her levitating in the air. We have her levitating in a giant Princess telephone. Make things interesting. Again, just a quick look outside, looking down at it as you went by. And everybody that went by in the boat got a nice view of it. Again, the Disney characters, you didn't have to do them in French this time. I don't know if they would do what you call a Texas drawl version of it, but you could talk to the Disney characters, and it would light up in the stagecoach or other things, and you could get your interaction. So it's a pretty good sized pavilion by HemisFair standards. Again, a lot of people went for very small displays compared to you know, what they had done in the 64 fair, but it was pretty popular model of what they had done. So we're going to jump out here. We move up to really the last time that Ma Bell had a particularly big presence. We're going up to Spokane, Expo 74 in Washington. And what will we find up there? Hey, surprise, you get to call the Disney characters. We see a little bit of a pattern here, right? So again, it works. It seems, you know, or it worked then. I don't know how well it worked today. You know, kids are more jaded. But there's pictures here of teenagers having a great time talking to it. You also had displays of different telephones, things up here about, you know, how you could use communications to keep track of energy use in buildings. If it's hot outside, communicate that inside, turn up the air conditioning. If it's cold, turn it down. So a whole display about how you can remotely manage facilities that you didn't have to have somebody there to keep an eye on it. All sorts of displays on how telephones work around the world, communicate things together. We're going to see more telephones again up on the ceiling here. Basically, one of every type telephone I think Ma Bell had ever made. So up here you could find the old candlestick phones, but you could also find the latest of mobile telephones for your car, which was a big thing in 1974 to be able to have a car phone. Wow, that was pretty unique. But all the sorts of different things and about Western Union built all these. I don't ever remember particularly a zebra stripe telephone up here myself, but I guess that was a model you could get for some point in time. Why they decided to put it upside down on the ceiling, I guess so people didn't break them or something. And again, big factor was called the Disney kids. It was still called the Bell system at that point. The logo for this fair, Bell system, the right move. You could go no wrong if you went with the Bell system. And we just flopping through it. We hear you. That's a great slogan. It's up there, sort of like your pride is showing, right? From NBC years ago. And the kids call them Disney. Hats, of course, still out there with the giant ostrich feathers on them. So that's there's one other thing I wanted to just go back, see if I could find out where I put it. All right. Yeah, let me just go back real quick here to the days of the Bell. Go back to New York real quick for some slides I forgot. So real quick, we see the Bell system coming back apart. The skin's off, the steel is up there. As I mentioned, the tower was left in place to still provide communications into and out of the site. Pretty sad seeing the once mighty thing ripped apart and shredded. Rheingold being taken apart in front. You can see how the bricks weren't really bricks. They were plastic veneer put up there and being torn down. But you can also see here, the blue box is linked to telephone call fraud. And if you read through it real quick, you'll see also William Cotter, age 19. So we'll talk about that at another point, another time. But that was great fun working for Ma Bell and great fun going to it. So let me take a look here at the chats, but other people.
No, you're not getting out of that one quick. Go back, tell us the story.
Go back to the story. Yeah, actually, that was a real career and life changer. It really was. I went to work for the phone company, and I worked in AT&T long lines in New York. And my job there was when somebody said, "I'm hearing static on a telephone call between New York and Chicago. Where's it coming from? Is it in the local phone? Is it in the cable someplace?" So I would literally call somebody in Chicago. We'd validate that, yeah, there was static on the line. And then we would figure someplace between us and, Chicago halfway. And we'd call that place. And if there was static between me and that guy, I'd say goodbye to Chicago. Then we would figure out, okay, where is it between me and the guy I'm now talking to? And you would start, triangulating it down that way. So, and then, hopefully it was someplace that it wasn't between me and them, it was between them and them, and it was their problem to go fix. But at the phone, so that was what I did an awful lot of time, just calling around the country, connecting together. We also, we would have military circuits that had special protection on them to make sure we, you didn't accidentally disconnect them, or you didn't disconnect the Tonight Show in the middle of its transcontinental broadcast, things like that. So, and I also, one of the things I did back in 1970, I found an old picture phone in our storage closet that had been put in there to test the picture phone quality. And the idea, again, was just like if I call Chicago for static, well, now I'd call Washington, D.C., see how the picture phone worked. And nobody knew how they worked because nobody was using them anymore. So a guy in Washington and I, we would spend our lunch hours getting it to work, and we got it to work, and we were looking at each other and said, okay, wow, we're looking at each other. That was fun. What do we do now? So it was probably one of the last calls made on the old picture phone technology circuits. So I went back to college, and with all this phone company knowledge up in the top of my head, and one day somebody said, hey, I understand there's a way to make free telephone calls, and how would that work? And I said, oh, easy peasy, because everything was done with what was called in-band signaling at that time. I mentioned earlier, the phone circuits could carry all sorts of things that the average person couldn't hear, whether it was a dog whistle or not. But the phone circuits for your voice circuits also carried all the switching circuits for how telephone calls were routed. So if I wanted to make a phone call from New York to Chicago using the phone system, we went to something called the 17C test board, and I would hit a button called KP to tell it to stand by for I'm going to be putting in key pulses. I would punch in the number I wanted to, and then I would hit a send button. Would send out a circuit, 2600 megahertz circuit or kilohertz, I don't remember. Anyway, 2600 hertz circuit would go out and say, hey, everything I'm going to tell you now is your instructions, you robotic slave. Here's what to do. So you would go off and you would send a circuit out there, tell it where to connect. The way that people figured out how to make this work was, oh, if I make a call to an 800 number, which is free, and during this 800 number call, I were to happen to send a 2600 cycle tone out, the thing at the other side is going to say, oh, what do you want me to do? And I'm going to say, well, I want you to connect to this number. Well, the phone system in your local town thinks that you're talking to an 800 number because it was a totally different billing system than the routing system. So it says, I'm not going to charge you for this. Stay on the line as long as you want. It's free. And you would go off and tell the circuit, go call, Moscow or, whatever sort of thing. So we found a way to route the thing out there. And I happily said, oh, yeah, it would work. We built a 2600 generator. And the touch-tone phones that we built for this, they put out a tone, but the number one was different than the number one on your touch-tone phone. Different set of multi-frequency tones would go out. So we got into a contest who could build this device the smallest one, so would fit inside a pack of cigarettes. Matter of fact, we were duplicating the communicators from the man from U.N.C.L.E., to see if you could build the whole thing into that. Oh yeah, somebody's mentioned the Captain Crunch whistle. That was a toy. They put it out, a Captain Crunch whistle in cereal boxes that when you blew it, for whatever reason, it made a 2600 hertz tone that if you blew that, it would disconnect your telephone. Then there were guys, there's one guy, John Draper, who's called Captain Crunch. He could actually whistle the tones to make a telephone call by whistling because he knew what frequencies this thing would generate to make the call. So we went off and we had great fun with it. We would call, and it make a long story long. We would do things like call somebody in Alaska and wake them up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, hi, we're trying to find out how the weather in Alaska is to let everybody know here on KXXXX radio. And how cold is it? And the guy would, where are you calling from? New York. And when people would go out to their barn to look at their thermometers. The most fun I think we had on it was there was a company called Drake Programming. And if you were a radio station, you would subscribe to Drake Programming. And he would tell you what top 40 songs to do, how often to do your commercials or whatever. But he had phone lines that were installed at your radio stations across the country that Drake could call up and listen to you and make sure you were doing what his programming told you to do. So you would dial a number in San Francisco, 213, whatever, and you could listen to it. We got a copy of the Drake list, and we would call and just listen to these stations long distance. And we'd be calling to the station in San Francisco, and they were having a thing like, okay, who can name this tune, sort of thing. And I would, call in, and the prize would be a pizza. So I'd be listening on the Drake line. We'd call on another line and say, oh, that's so and such song. And the guy says, oh, great, you want a free pizza? Where are you? And I'd say Potsdam, New York. That guy would be like, what do you mean you're in Potsdam, New York? That's impossible. I said, no, we have really good up here with the Northern Lights and everything. We get really good skip, and I can pick up radio stations across the country a lot. And the guy would say, there's no way you could be in Potsdam, New York. And I said, yeah, I'm at area code 315-268-2528. Call me if you want to prove it. And the guy'd call you back, and you'd answer the phone. Hi, I really am hearing you here in Potsdam. And they could never figure out how we were doing it. We won a lot of pizzas, but I never got the chance to go out to San Francisco and pick them all up. We would do things like call around the world and see how many times we could route the same call around the world. So you'd say hello, and you'd be waiting, and 10 seconds later it would come back hello on the other phone on how long it had gone. We would call the American Embassy in Moscow just to say hi. I mean, we had a lot of fun with it until we got caught. Then it wasn't so much fun. Basically, one girl wanted to use the box to call somebody else, and the two roommates had an argument, and they had this major blow up, and the one girl's mother worked for the phone company. So now she's turned everybody in, and the next thing you know, the New York State Police are knocking on my college door, and I still remember the dean of students knocking on my door, says the police are coming to arrest you, and I said, for what? Because how many things could there be? I said, I'm not saying. But yeah, I got arrested for criminal tampering with a public utility, conspiracy with intent to defraud, and possession of burglar tools. And the phone company, I was out on bail for about a year, and the phone company and I kept meeting, and they kept wanting me to plead guilty. If I'd come to work for the phone company, they'd agree to drop the charges. And I finally said, nope, no, no, you guys are just going to drop the charges, and we're going to walk away from it today. And my attorney about had a heart attack. And I said, why would we drop the charges? And I said, because when I go to trial and I describe how easy this is to do, you're going to be in a world of hurt. There was also another way you could get free incoming phone calls with something called a Zener Diode that cost 29 cents. And they were even more scared about the Zener Diode. So that was a whole nother phone freaking thing. So now flash forward 2 years later, I'm trying to get out of college and try to get a job and figure out what I want to go do. And get this call from the United States Navy that we'd like you to discuss coming to work for the Navy, on the Polaris side, Poseidon submarines. And I said, well, I was arrested. I have no criminal record. Everything was dropped, but I was arrested. And they said, yeah, we know that. And if you were smart enough to break the phone company system, how would you like a whack at failsafe? So that's how I got into computer security. And then a couple of years later, down at Disney World, I walked in and said, hey, I'd like a job programming the country bears and that sort of thing. And I said, no, how would you like to be the guy in charge of Disney's computer security? So, again, I directly, link it back to, going to the Bell system, figuring out how the phone company worked, working for the phone company, becoming a nuclear weapons designer, going to work for Disney, meeting my wife. And Carol can tell you, we went out to get our TSA pre-check at the airport, and they asked, have you ever been arrested? And I said, oh, yeah. This all sorts of people came over. Wow, we've never had anybody actually admit that before. And then when I went for my LAPD credentials and interviews and all the rest of that, it was like, you did what? But again, I made it 29 years now with the LAPD. So I guess I was safe. But yeah, Bill the Phone Phreaker, it was a very interesting period of time that you don't, Bill could have only used his good gifts for evil rather than good. Yeah. The funny thing was, and again, it wasn't so funny at the time, but the night I got arrested, they take you to jail, and you get the one free phone call, right? So I said, I want to call my parents and do it. And the people from the phone company were absolutely freaked out. No, he could have a number that when he dials, it's pre-programmed to bring down the entire phone system in the United States. You can't let him make a call. And so, well, if I can't have a call, then I get to go home, right? So I finally decided they would look up my parents' phone number and they would make the call for me. And then hey, Mom, Dad, I need you to come up here. But it was a very interesting time. And yeah, so if you go search on William Cotter and Ma Bell and that sort of thing, it does pop up. So it was fun time. So other than Bill being a non-convicted felon, anything else people have on their mind?
I had wondered when you had posted the topic for this week whether or not you may include at the very end just a little bit of about Spaceship Earth. Although it's not within any of the world fairs, it is a continuation of AT&T's work, and I didn't know if you had thought about doing that or not.
No, I had thought about it. I didn't get into it time-wise, excuse me, because of, again, not being a fair particular. And I also may be taking a deeper dive into some of the Epcot shows coming up. So I thought I would save that for some of the Epcot over the years, and how things have changed from Walter Cronkite and, the modifications made over time to that show. Sounds like our mail is here again. Yeah, Wayne Gretel, about this time of using wire wrapping would only solder bad wire wraps in the office. Again, for people that aren't familiar with wire wrapping, it's you use a pin that comes out and you use a tool that you put the wire in and it ties it real tightly to it. There were also other ways you could do it where they had two prongs that would come out and you'd slide the wire down and then it would kind of like slice the insulation and grab it in there in between. So we still did an awful lot of soldering of big cables, but the phone company wanted to get out of doing soldering because soldering generates heat generates fires, and they had a tremendous fire at a New York telephone facility, and I think it was in Brooklyn, where a guy had the soldering iron, put it down, didn't turn it off, and it ended up burning out the entire friggin' building and caused all sorts of major issues. And it was also dangerous to work with because you get the lead and everything on yourself. So yeah, wire wrapping guns were becoming into a display. And again, all these things that Ma Bell were doing, it was really a super company. The one thing I got a real kick out of was for all the technology of the phone company, right? And all the amazing thing. When we would get static on a phone line between us and Chicago again, before we called the guy out in Chicago, we would try to figure out how do you clear the line. And there were two things that you would do. One was you would take, I think it was 24 volts, and you put it across a certain part of the circuit to try to clean out anything that built up in the capacitors, and you would shock it. If that didn't work, there was a section of lead-lined cable about yay big that hung on the side of the equipment bay in with a rope strap. And it was like, what is this piece of cable here for? Well, you would take the thing, walk down to the piece of equipment that was not cooperating, and would bang the capacitors and hit them with this lead cable and try to shake it up. And that actually cleared about 25% of the problems right there. So on a really good day, if you could be there and working on the thing, you'd hear something, like, pow, bang, crash. And every now and then you hear somebody curse because they dropped it on their foot. It was really heavy. But the great technology of zapping it with electricity or beating it with a lead cable.
The old engineer's method, just hit it with a hammer.
Yeah. Wayne, go ahead.
Yeah, the wire wrapping, I'm sure, was adopted only after years of accelerated life testing, because everything that Bell put together had to be guaranteed internally to last at least 25 years without a failure. That was their minimum criterion. And one of the summers I worked installing equipment, the supervisor turned to us and said, this relay has been intermittent. He took out its hammer and smashed it, and he says, replace it. It's not intermittent anymore.
Yeah, it was really amazing. The technology we also take for granted today. I mean, I remember when they introduced wire wrapping, that was just, it will never work. I mean, if you don't solder it, it's going to fall apart. Well, you had to take one of those things apart. You had to have a special unwrapping tool, and it was tremendous stuff. Richard, you mentioned you worked for Bell Labs. What did you invent back there? See if Richard comes off mute. There he is.
I didn't really invent anything. In fact, I got there at the tail end of Bell Labs. Literally, I was interviewed before the three companies split apart. And I was with AT&T Bell Labs, the business division that did the PBXs and the Centrexes. I did various things before that for Bellcore, so I did design some services that the public's, switch telephone network used, and millions of people, of course, use some of those services. And as I finished out, I worked as the technical advisor to the group that moved the the technical document fulfillment from a warehouse model to an online model, so people could order things and peruse, the documents they needed. And that was a big job because the Bell system made so many different things. They kept them in operation for many, many years. And sometimes even internally, they would come out with competing products. It was really kind of a mess. But that was it. So I did have experience in Bell Labs, Lucent, and Avaya.
Oh,
And
neat.
so all three places.
Yeah, again, the company was amazing. I still have a set of Bell system practices out in the garage that tell you how to hook the wire to the outside of the house and how to make sure the wire is coiled so rain drips off of it and doesn't come through the wall, and basically how to do almost anything. So if I ever want to go and rebuild the Bell system, I've got a good set of manuals out there. But it was tremendous stuff. And
Yeah.
when I worked at Boy Scout camp, we had a phone system. Dick may remember. Dick Horn was the fellow that we first had a switchboard at our camp, and then just like old days, you'd pick up a phone, it would buzz, an operator would answer, and connect me to the dining hall. Well, this fellow Dick Horn got a phone system, small switchboard or centric system was being put out to surplus, and convinced them to donate it to us, but it came with no manuals, no wiring diagrams, anything. And I was working for AT&T, so I found an office in Brooklyn that had a copy of the wiring diagrams and blueprints for this 10, 15-year-old phone system. And I called up and said, I need a copy of it. They didn't even ask why. I just drove, I took the subway from my office in Manhattan over to Brooklyn, picked it up, and then that system sat and worked for the next 30 years at the Boy Scout camp. So, and the thing that was interesting about that was it get really cold in winter. It was one of the stepped rotary dial systems. So you would pick up the phone, and the touch tone, the dial tone generator would come on and go as it was getting up to speed. And then you would dial, and the thing would go, the first couple of numbers you would dial would go click, click, click as the grease started to go. And finally, by the end of the weekend, it was working okay. But now we've got an electronic system up there. What was the blue box? Yeah, you missed that. You'll have to listen to the blue box was a way to make free phone calls and to get arrested. It was a great technology. Now, Beth mentioned, be
Bill,
right
can I
with you.
jump in? Can
Sorry,
I jump in just for a minute?
Yeah.
For a second? I just pushed out a couple of things that talk about the Bell system in its heyday in 63 or 64. I did get a chance to visit the Telstar receiving station when I was a young teenager in Andover, Maine. And those links that I'm pushing out will show that. Literally, they had a gigantic antenna horn that would talk to the Telstar satellite. And the way they protected it was inside essentially a Dacron, rubberized Dacron building that was 13 stories high, a radome. And you had to walk into an airlock in order to get in there because they needed to maintain a positive air pressure to keep the dome up. But that's the kind of incredible stuff. That was, someone described Bell System as being like the advanced planning system for the universe, back in the mid 60s. It seemed like that to us with the stuff that we experienced.
Yeah,
Okay,
it
thanks.
was really well done. I mean, the facility I was in New York was called New York 7, and it has basically a 42-story building with only 21 floors in it. Everything was twice the height because of all the equipment bays, but it didn't have any windows in it because it wanted to survive a nuclear blast. And it was also had the slowest elevators in the entire universe, I think. But it was an incredible facility. And then like I said, everything they built, you could take out your phone, plug it in today, and it will still work today. Good luck. Because people always say, "Oh, I got an old Betamax." Well, they don't work because the capacitors have worn out or dried out or whatever. You pull an old 1930s telephone out and plug it in, 99% chance it's going to work. So and it's amazing today too that even in today's world of, you know, via the landline, rotary dials still work on the landlines. You know, that, you know, you would think, oh, I'm going to pull out this phone, but it's not going to work. You can still dial the number 7 and it's going to work on a rotary phone. So it's kind of amazing if, you know, grandfather that old technology into things. Wayne, get to you 1 second. Beth had just mentioned comments about the trip she was at earlier about a giant cyclorama. I guess that was in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's at the Atlanta History Center. It used to be down at a building in Grant Park near the zoo where the Texas from the Great Locomotive Chase was housed. And a few years ago, they moved both the Texas and the cyclorama to the Atlanta History Center and restored both in the process. So we hadn't been to see it since it had been restored.
Yeah, it's their way of communicating in a giant show. I haven't seen that one. I've seen the other one that was mentioned in the chat at Gettysburg on numerous times, and I've got pictures of the one at Atlanta, you know, that Panaview sold on souvenir slides.
Right.
But yeah, amazing. And I liked your comment, something about it was redone to be more friendly to the Confederacy.
At one time, when it was brought down to the South for the first time, apparently the person who bought it thought they wouldn't be able to sell tickets in the current state, so they made it a little bit more sympathetic to the Southerners. And then, you know, over time, of course, it's been brought back to the original state. And there's actually an exhibit at the base of it now that talks all about sort of the history of it and the history of perceptions and how perception is not history. And you know, that the film that goes along with it now sort of explains that too, that, you know, at different points, this was used in different ways to tell a different story. And now we've tried to restore it back to what it was, you know, intended to be.
Yeah, but it reminds me of a joke a friend of mine told. We had a good friend who was German guy, really great guy. And this other guy, David Bent, would always talk about Hans, about, how does Hans spend his weekends? Well, he sits and he watches The Longest Day, but he plays it in reverse, you know, so. Yeah, thanks for that, Beth. Appreciate seeing the pictures you posted on that on Facebook. Wayne, you had something?
Yeah, you talked about Bell having a standard practice for everything. And my sister worked for Illinois Bell for quite a few years, and she actually met her husband because she was a business system rep and went out to sell service to his business. But one day she brought home a Illinois Bell blueprint, an internal joke about the chime ringers, and it had a complete specification for how they would be hooked up. They would be supplied in the bing bong configuration, and at customers' request could be reversed to bong bing, or even bing bing or bong bong, but never would they reverse the order of the chimes to be bing bong, bong bing.
Yeah, it's amazing that the technology, you know, like even on the payphones, you know, when you dropped your money in at the time, the operators would listen to see whether or not you were, you know, putting in $2.55 for your next 3 minutes, and they would listen to, you know, the phones going bing bong bing, and people started realizing, oh, if I have a recording and it will go bing bong bing, you know, they'll do it. So that was another way people were making free phone calls. They would go out to the payphone circuits and have a little recording that they knew every time I made this call, it's $2.55, they'd record it. Then another guy started making a digital device that would, what you call it, you know, have it, you push it, it would do the quarter thing, the dime sound, the nickel sound or whatever. So the phone company started realizing that, hey, all these payphones now have an awful lot of money in there. So what we need to do now is during the time that we are going to let you put the coins in, we will mute the microphone circuit so that you can't introduce the sounds of nickels and dimes going into the phones. So all of a sudden emergency change orders went out, and, you know, the circuits had to be changed in all the payphones to cut the microphone out during the time of the coins. was also the same sort of thing where the operator was able to make the refund to you, that if you put all your money in and that you didn't get through the other side, the thing would drop out. So now people found out how if you were able to cut into the wire going to the payphone and ground it, it would return all the money back. So they had to come up with another countermeasure to that. So it was fascinating to see the number of things that people did to poor Ma Bell over time. And I plead guilty. I feel bad.
You know,
So-
there was a circuit that I put together that was published in Abby Hoffman's book, Steal This Book, if you remember.
Oh yeah.
And I built it in a little plastic container and painted it brown. And this must have been back in, 71, 72 when the book came out. And I put it on the phone. Whether or not it worked, I can't remember. And I don't remember the circuit. I have the little box somewhere stashed away. But, that was about the same time, that I think the circuit touted that, here's how to make free phone calls, or at least free long distance phone calls without having to pay for it.
Yeah, as I said, the Zener Diode was a real interesting one because it basically it's a special type of diode that will let a certain amount of voltage through, but not voltage over a certain amount. And we found out that the billing circuit used a different amount of voltage than the communication circuit. So if you put a Zener Diode in series with your phone line, the communication circuit would let you talk, but the billing circuit wouldn't think it was answered. And the phone company, again, started running computer programs like, why is somebody calling a number and letting it ring for 2.5 hours? Because the billing circuit thought it was ringing. The voice circuit lets you
Right.
chat. So it, did I get free tickets for, did you get free tickets for you and Bill to the Adele concert last week? You must be thinking of somebody else, Tom.
The Adele did a concert at the observatory in Los Angeles, and I happened to find it on as it was on, so I taped it, but I didn't know anything about it beforehand.
Oh, okay.
But I answered him.
Okay. So, yeah, now I'm probably going to get bills for damages from the phone company from years past. But it was all interesting, and like I said, the things you don't realize when you're doing that. Any photos of the AT&T exhibit at the 33 World's Fair? I don't think I had anything specific of the 33 Fair, Derek. That's why I didn't throw them in here. This was kind of a crazy week, so I had I was literally putting this together at one last night, which is why some of the pictures were still kind of out of order. It's been kind of crazy schedule wise lately. We had a lot of work done in the house this week, so between the contractors being here and everything else, it was it's hard to concentrate, put the thing together when they're drilling holes for the walls of the house to run cables for the new video cameras and stuff. So, well, again, Ma Bell, great exhibit. And other things up in Canada, Expo 86. There was a Circlevision film, but again, it wasn't the Ma Bell of the past. Richard, what you holding up there? You're on mute, sir.
I don't think we'll see it, not that it's that terribly important, but it's a binder for circuit development and documentation standards for Bell Laboratory. It's the kind of binder that would have the standards and procedures and practices that a lot of us would have run into in the Bell system.
Great. Oh, but people have one more moment before we go. Would you like to see a vintage booklet on picture phones? How many want to see picture phones? Okay, we'll bring up this vintage booklet on picture phones. Here, it's a PDF, so let me just get to it. It kind of shows you why this technology did not work in the commercial world. So let's see, share screen. Here we are. Okay, so picture phone, again, we came out at the fair and they made some changes over time. You might realize in the early ones we saw at the fair, the screen was oriented. Did it go horizontal? Did it go vertically? But here's what they're going to see in 1964, this booklet that they put out, Seen by Telephone, the picture phone story. By the way, you can get this on my my website. But we're going through here. You know, what would it be like to be seen by telephone? They've been working on this for a number of years. Actually, as soon as television was being invented, Bell Telephone was working on ways on how you do the picture phone. So they're going to go tell us in this booklet how the whole picture phone works. And they had this great technology, again, to go between Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C. Again, that's where I tested this between New York and Washington, that we still found the system sitting here. So it was $16 to go between New York and Washington for 3 minutes, and that was in $64. That's something up there in about $140, for 3 minutes to go for that call. Not cheap. So you stop and think about it. And it was not cheap for the phone company. As I mentioned, it took 12 circuits out of revenue service, but it also had to be done with operators. You could not go at this point in time and just get a picture phone, put on your desk and call somebody, even if you wanted to. The technology wasn't there. So you go to Grand Central Station, you would go to the Prudential Building, or you go to the National Geographic Building in Washington, D.C. You would make an appointment beforehand and book somebody at the other side. Now, they thought you'd have a hard time making appointments and you'd have to get in. Well, in reality, you would talk to the people and they said, I haven't had a customer this week. Because for 3 minutes and you could only basically see the person's face, it really didn't give you a lot of technology. If you wanted to hold up a document or anything, there was no easy way to share something over the phone like I'm here sharing with you. So it was a great way to interview people or something. At Warner Brothers, I had staff around the world, and I put video conferencing in line because it was a lot easier for me to interview potential candidates in, say, England or Tokyo over the phone, talk to 100 people that way, and then get it down to the finalists in person, as opposed to fly over there, interview somebody, fly back, interview somebody else. So picture phones were great, but you can see from the limitation on the screen here, you're really only able to see people, and they didn't have a lot of ability to do conference rooms and stuff like that. So here's how it worked. You arrive there, the attendant will make the call for you. You dial the phone, you see them, and then you can hang up, use the speakerphone. And if you want to, you can put the picture on hold, or you can put the sound on hold, or at the end of your 3 minutes, you're just done. But it was really a very limited technology for a very expensive sort of capability at that point in time. So we'll go here. It's showing you how it's working. So we have the very first visual phone call made in 1927. Again, they had been trying to figure out how to make this work. In 1927, a small screen, and they were talking from Bell Labs. I think it had about the resolution today, of course, we're into 4K definition. This thing was incredibly bad resolution. You could make out who was on the other side, but it really wasn't practical. So now Telstar comes by, and all of a sudden it starts giving you a whole different capability that you can send a much wider signal strength over, because there was just no ability to tie that many circuits together back in the early days. So 1948, Bell Labs comes up with the transistor and starts letting you make these things small. The big systems, when they first tried it, were about the size of a refrigerator. And now with transistor, you can get it down to the size of the unit that you see this guy working on here. And they're mentioning, as Richard mentioned, it goes through the Bell System satellite communication station at Andover, Maine. And that was picked because of its ability to have long periods of time that it would be in communication with the satellite as it was overhead. And here, picture phones on display at the Bell System and at Disneyland, and you could go back and forth with free communications between them. When they remodeled Tomorrowland, and I think it was '67, they built a special Bell System exhibit on the walkway that would go into Small World, was off to the left-hand side, right near where the canal boat is, so that they could still keep picture phone active between other venues, because the one that they had in the main Bell System Pavilion was being torn down and rebuilt at that point in time. So again, it was an interesting technology. The only major company that I'm aware that really took to it was Alcoa Aluminum. Alcoa had a large picture phone network put in place. They had operations up in Messina, New York, near where I went to college. And then they also had operation, I think it was in Pennsylvania. And they put in the largest picture phone network that I know was ever installed, that they were able to make their own direct dial calls, picture phone to picture phone, without having to go through an operator. So Alcoa was very gung-ho on it because it said it was saving them a lot of technology. But that was the second, that was the picture phone 2, was the larger square units that you may have seen pictures of. And they were able also now to share documents between it. Basically, the same equivalent of a webcam that we're using today, that they could switch between the picture phone, the document camera, and then so they were saying, hey, we're thinking about doing this to this blast furnace or whatever, show it to the other side and go with it. So it was kind of interesting. Yeah, picture phone now it's called Zoom. Oh, a very important question here, very important. Do we end up having to get a new oven, or was it fixable? Thank
I
God.
answered him.
Oh, okay, thank God it was fixable. That was, we were really trying to figure out how we were going to do Thanksgiving dinner with a microwave, but they were able to fix the oven, so that worked. So again, appreciate your look back at the days of Ma Bell. The pavilion was a fantastic pavilion, particularly the 64 one. I spent so many hours going through it, and it became, as you see, I didn't intend to have it become such a big part of my life, but it did. So I appreciate folks taking time on Saturday to share it. Next Saturday be no talk. I'm going to be out on a road trip doing research on a upcoming talk, and assuming the weather cooperates and all, I'm going to be out of town for that particular day, and we look forward to it. We have a talk coming up with Don Lancaster about the 33 or whatever, 36 I think was Dallas Fair that he's been diligently working on, and have a couple others coming online. Again, if there's things that you want to go and share, Beth, if you want to share us more pictures of your trip to Atlanta. Like I said, I've never seen that particular cyclorama other than pictures, but I love seeing the pictures of the Texas. That's a great museum setting that they had that put in. As you said, very open air, very nice.
Yeah,
So again, thank
right.
you.
It's got a big glass wall on one side, and if you drive, oh, sorry, it's got a glass wall on one side, and if you drive by at night, it's very well lit. It's beautiful just to drive by in the evening too.
Every time I see a big glass wall like that, all I can think about is Windex, and who has a giant 200-gallon bottle of Windex? So, well, I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving. For those of us in the United States, I don't think Canada has the same Thanksgiving that we do. They have a different date. So appreciate, yeah, Tom says, I'm glad you didn't go to prison. Yeah, well, so was I. It was, again, the things, when my kids were getting ready to go to college, I said, one piece of advice: whatever you think about doing, think what your dad would do and do the opposite. Because the number of things that I don't know how I got away with the stuff that I got away with. It was insane. And again, we weren't trying to be malicious with this. It was just the technology that you heard. Oh, I hear that there's a way to do this, and you go, okay, how to do it. And we weren't out to defraud the phone company. There were people building blue boxes and selling them off to other people, like Steve Wozniak from Apple fame. So that was one of the ways he was paying for things. He was selling people blue boxes. For us, it was like, oh, if yours is the size of a telephone, mine's going to be the size of a cigarette pack. Oh, your size of a cigarette pack, I'm going to get mine in a matchbook. I mean, it was just really, it was technology for the sake of technology. And we were bonehead, butthead, stupid, and not realizing that what we were doing was very wrong, it was very illegal, and we shouldn't have been doing it. And, I was very lucky that it ended up the way that it ended up going, because it could have ended up very, very badly. So, I still take ribbing at it at the station for people, from it. Others, they were like, they let you in, huh? I said, yeah, well, it was interesting. So,
that's called research.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I got pulled into the dean's office in graduate school one time because the idiot professor in charge of the new computer department that we had in architecture school left his computer with it unattended, and the password was, anyhow, I was able to get in through his password. So I went down and just researched. It wasn't anything malicious. It was just, good. He left his account open. I went in and looked around, and somehow they discovered it. And I got a scathing letter from the dean a week later about expulsion and violation of college rules and all this kind of crap. And I kind of just wrote a letter and said, shut up. This is research. Nothing was done. Well, he dropped it. And, it got totally dropped because they knew they didn't have anything to bank on. Plus, I was a graduate student at the time in the lab. So, it was like, hey,
These days,
you got to be more cautious. Don't leave your computer open, idiot.
yeah, but these days, if you did it, there would be things to stand on because a lot of laws have changed. When I went to work for Disney, one of the things I had to do was we had a major computer fraud that was occurring, and it was the operator that was stealing money was at the Contemporary Resort in Florida, but the computers were out here in California in Burbank, and they were trying to figure out what law has this person broken. If you're stealing money in Florida, do you get prosecuted under that law? Do you get prosecuted under California law? Finally, we were able to go with interstate commerce fraud. But I had to testify to the Florida state legislator at the time because there was no law about computer theft in Florida. Now, almost every state and federally, just the simple act of accessing somebody else's computer without their consent and authority has now been made illegal. So, and I spent, when I did get out of college, again, if someday, if anybody ever wants to go how to hack failsafe 101, we could do that. But part of my job was to break into Navy computer installations around the country, and not to, obviously do anything malicious, but to try to figure out, what people were going to do and how they were going to do it, and then how to keep people from doing it. So it was, back in, needless to say, one of my favorite movies of all time is Sneakers. If you ever get a chance to watch it, Robert Redford movie, it is absolutely wonderful. It is. And what was really ironic, you want to make things come full circle, right? If people remember the movie Sneakers, they're hired to just steal this box that basically would decrypt any computer communications and decipher anything. That box is now taken by the mob, and he's going to use it to do all these terrible things. And it's they have to break into a toy company that the mob is running to. The mob is running this toy company as a front. They got to break into this toy company as elaborate security. Well, where was the toy company? That was Countrywide Mortgage. Where did I work? Countrywide Mortgage. So it was kind of fun that we'd walk into the building. Of course, it was nothing inside was the same, but I was just people would say, you used to be a hacker, didn't you? And I said, yeah. And so maybe get you a job as an extra or something. I said, no, I don't want anything to do with it, anything more. I reformed. I'm not evil. I don't.
Yeah, well, it was the same thing. War Games came out, and in the beginning, Matthew Broderick had his phone, he was dialing computer modems. And when I saw the movie, I thought, well, heck, I can do that. So I went home and wrote some software and had my H89, doing the same thing on an old, I guess I had a Hayes. It was either 300. I don't even know if the 1200 smart modems had come out yet, but I had a Hayes 300 smart modem. And I let it dial numbers all day long, looking for a modem to answer, and had it record everything.
We did that. We had a device that was called a data point 2200, and we would do the same thing. We would dial numbers, but we already knew the phone number that we wanted to dial, but we wanted to then try the password. So we were in Dam Neck, Virginia, and we were in a hotel. And we had the data point just calling the Navy base, trying to password A, B, C, D. After 4 times would hang up, try E, F. So we just let this thing run 24 hours a day while we were doing other stuff, right? Well, turned out local calls were not free. So we get the telephone, we get the bill when we go to check out. And the hotel was something like, again, we're going back 1975 or something. I mean, the telephone, the hotel was $32 a night, and the phone bill was $1,400. And we go, oh crap, didn't realize that. So we got to the front desk and we said, well, obviously your phone system's got a problem, because this thing says I dialed this number 27,000 times every 32 seconds. Obviously I couldn't be doing that. The guy says, okay, I guess I have to take it off the bill. we made sure after that, we only stayed in hotels that had local long distance calling. And the phone bill,
That's
it was
good.
insane.
Yeah.
So thanks all. We'll see you in 2 weeks. I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving.
Yes,
Take
you
care.
do. Great presentation. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.